This is Roger Ebert. It's taken off the
Read this
internet.
paragraph.
Okay. All right. I hated this movie. hated this movie. You know, if you read between the lines, it's not that bad.
Welcome to this special Rob Reiner tribute episode of Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. With the recent tragic deaths of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer-Reiner, we feel it's appropriate to dedicate a show to honoring Rob's enormous impact on our culture and our lives. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios.
We're joined by Mathew Klickstein, an author and pop culture historian whose books have covered such topics as Nickelodeon, The Simpsons, the San Diego Comic-Con, and Lloyd Kaufman, president and co-founder of Troma Entertainment. Mathew, welcome back to Amusing Jews.
Thank you all for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Well, I wish it was in happier circumstances, but I understand Rob Reiner had a pretty big impact on your life, and, as well as me and Jonathan's. You want to say a little bit more about that, Mathew?
I think one of the reasons why we're all so devastated by Rob's passing is that even those of us who never met him, didn't know him, and you can say whatever you want about parasocial relationships and everything else, is that he didn't just, his work didn't just affect our story retelling and the way that we're now, many of us writers and filmmakers and maybe comedians and others, but his films really impacted our lives and the way that we see the world, our perspective. I got into, just as a quick example, a movie like Stand By Me. For our generation, that was such an important film because the movie's so much about being a young boy and friends of young boy. And even though it takes place, of course, in an earlier era, and when we watched it when it came out in the 80s, it just, I think, had a big impact on how we as young boys played and how we were friends with each other and were mischievous. And I think even in some ways, for good or ill, kind of looked for those different archetypes of, oh, you're this character and you're that character, not to mention, obviously, the greatest vomit scene in all of history. But even just that, the humor of that and the way that he was able to overlap the sentimental aspects of the film with the humor and the mischievousness. And that had a big impact, I think, as did various other films of his, such as Princess Bride, about teaching us about, again, loyalty and love and magic and even connectivity to our grandparents with the Fred Savage character and the Peter Falk character. I think that's why Rob's passing, aside from, of course, just the horrendous details of what happened, why his passing is so devastating for us is because his films touch not only our storytelling and our filmmaking and our writing and our comedy work ourselves and our acting, but our lives. And he made films over and over and over again that continued to do that, even films he acted in. Or produced, or that he was just involved in different ways, that kind of really taught us about ourselves and about the world and impacted us in that regard. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I don't think I have memories that predate my memories of watching both Stand By Me and The Princess Bride. They used to play Stand By Me a lot on TV, the edited version, Channel 5 in LA, I think, every week. And that one scene with the vomit that you mentioned, it's so classic. And of course, the most memorable scene, not only in that movie, but one of the most memorable scenes, I think, in film, at least for me.
Here you got a big appetite, lord ass. Don't even think about winning this.
Boy, are you fat.
Don't pay any attention to those fools, lardass. It's Davy.
But because the censors were so uptight in those days, in the 80s, that scene involves the chant, lard ass, lard ass, lard ass. And on TV, it was always lard, lard, lard.
I remember that. And see, here's some I absolutely remember that. And I remember even in school the next day, we were all like, what the heck? Did you see that? And that was, I will say real quick, I think that was kind of almost a positive aspect of the way they would censor films back then is the next day, because we all would watch the same movies because there was, 10 channels or 5 channels or whatever it was. We would all say, oh, did you see such and such? And that specifically remember that. And it was that shared kind of, elementary school version of the water cooler moment. For me too, I would say what I appreciated about that film is that there was almost a cartoonish quality to it. It did have this kind of Leave It to Beaver sitcom sort of structure to it and quality to it that then could be subverted by some of the reality that would happen of not only the dead body, but it's giving me shivers right now. The whole thing with, the older brother and him dying and the dad saying, wish it was you. And I remember that affected so many of us, but particularly the Kiefer Sutherland character. Kiefer Sutherland in Stand By Me, I think, was the first time where I was really, truly scared of a character. And I remember kind of thinking about, wow, is that going to happen to me? And am I going to have to face a bully like that? And they made the character so real. And they allowed young boys and certainly young girls, whoever is watching it, to be confronted with the reality of there is death. And sometimes your parents are going to say something really terrible like that. Or we all had friends who had, parents maybe who were even worse than that. And to see that represented on television or in a film was very eye-opening and really connected us to the world on a larger level. Because before that, I agree with you. It's hard to remember, TV or movies I watched before Princess Bride or Stand By Me. But I remember kind of having this moment of almost, oh my goodness, I'm really connecting with the larger world, because luckily my parents weren't like that, but I certainly had friends who did, or who had, bullies like that, or had, a brother or sister maybe who passed away. And so you're in this kind of fun world, and they showed in the movie they're singing and that lollipop and the whole thing, but then there are these real moments, and that sort of brought us up to a new level. And I think that's really important. That's the kind of impact that Rob's work had on us.
The interesting thing about Stand By Me, at least in my own experience, is that it does hold up so well that my daughter, who's now 15, she's a budding cinephile. She actually, what she does is, when we have like a large DVD collection in my family, and when she watches a movie from the main collection that she really likes, she then brings it to her own room and then puts it on her shelf, and that means that it's her movie now. And she did that with Stand By Me, which is wonderful. But Joey was saying that Stand By Me is one of those rare films that Stephen King, who of course wrote the source material, actually loved that movie, and that's a great tribute as well. Joey, what was it that you were reading?
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw like an opinion article in NY Times that said, it's probably Stephen King's most autobiographical movie, and he was really glad that Rob Reiner had done it. I was also thinking about the fact I've never seen Misery, but it's such an iconic film that I feel like I've seen it even without having seen it. I mean, like, it looms large. I know everything about that movie because of how present it is in our pop culture and how its fingers are in, every single film and TV pie that has come after it, where they all make references to it. And I don't know if that was like Kathy Bates's big breakout role, but I mean, she's amazing. And I think of, listen, I'm going to see it. I only saw Stand By Me for my first time today. So I'm doing a lot of catch up in terms of movie watching.
Misery is definitely the next one to see. I go to a what's called a kava bar. It's sort of a sober bar. I drink alcohol occasionally too, and go to coffee shops and whatnot. I'm in a college town, and there are these kava bars that have started popping up. And there's a young girl there who's in the theater program. She is always asking about movies, and I kept prodding her about Misery because it came up at one point a few months ago, and kind of became a running gag of, did you see Misery yet? Did you see Misery yet? By a wild coincidence, there's been a play version of Misery that's been going around also. I think it's been going in other places too. And I was like, the play is even happening now down the street and all this. And she finally saw it. And the two takeaways is one is, yeah, you'll say it too, Joey. She was just, and she's probably, again, 22, maybe 21. So she's next generation, but she couldn't believe she had never seen it. And she was saying, like, this is already my favorite movie I've ever seen. Like, thank you for forcing me to see it. I don't know why I didn't see it beforehand. Everyone kept telling me to see it. I just didn't. And she would just went on and on and on. We probably talked about it for about an hour. And she's coming from it from a young actress perspective who's seeing Kathy Bates's performance, as well as obviously James Caan and and even Richard Farnsworth. I mean, everybody in that film is fantastic. I felt really good that I was able to kind of pass that along to her, and now she's going to tell her friends, and she wants to show it to other people, and to just keep that legacy going because it's such an important film.
Yeah, I think one of the amazing things about that film is how it blends the comedic and the horror and the thriller, and it's like a multi-genre film, much like Princess Bride. There's so much going on in Princess Bride, both in the book, and I think one of the things that makes Princess Bride work in particular is that William Goldman wrote both the book and the screenplay, and he's look, the guy behind Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, you can't go wrong. It is such a perfect movie. Actually, I would say that on the list of films that have like no bad scenes or no bad casting or no bad anything, Princess Bride is in that very rare category.
It's funny, Jonathan. I actually thought you were talking about Misery. I would say both those films. That's true. I think that Princess Bride is the most watchable movie I can think of. Like, it's just one of those movies you could probably watch 3 or 4 times in a row. It's the kind of movie where it's just, if it's on at a coffee shop, a bar or coffee shop or whatever, or, at a friend's house or something like that, like, you could just sit down and watch it. Like, there's no reason to stop watching. You're never going to say, hey, I just watched this recently, or, oh, I've seen that movie. I mean, we all know every single line. We all know what happens. I can't imagine ever turning off Princess Bride because you just always want to watch it. Because of obviously the nostalgia, the memories a lot of us attached to it, but also it's such a fun, funny, sad, strange, scary, wild film. I mean, the scene in the forest and the rats and everything like that, the rodents, and I mean everything about it. It's so magical and special of a film that it is a perfect film. I believe that Misery is another flawless, perfect film that, as hard as it is to watch in certain scenes, of course, but that's the magic of it too, is it makes you feel so much. It's so evocative. And that's once again, it's Rob's quality. I mean, this is a guy who he's not necessarily quote unquote writing his films, although of course he has a lot of creative agency over them. But just the fact that he can direct all these different genres of films, many of them, as you said, that mix genres even, well up until his unfortunate passing. I mean, I was already saying before this, so I'm not just a Johnny come lately. I said that Spinal Tap 2 was one of the best movies of 2025. In fact, up until I saw it, I hadn't really seen a movie, and it only just came out, I think, in September. I hadn't seen a movie in the entire year that I really enjoyed, that I really connected with. And I even told people afterwards, I said, I know it might sound silly. I know it's a quote unquote goofy comedy, but I really think Spinal Tap 2 is not only the best movie of the year so far, but the first movie that I've seen in 2025 that I would say that about. And this is this guy's 20th, 25th film or whatever it is, at the age that he was at, and he's still working at such a high level. And that is so rare, unfortunately, as we know, let's be honest, that a filmmaker actually continues to be good or even gets better. I would say Spinal Tap 2 is actually better than the original. I always thought Spinal Tap was a fun film, obviously iconic. There's some great moments in it, but I was never the kind of person, oh, let's watch Spinal Tap. Spinal Tap 2, though, like, I forgot what it was like to laugh so hard in the theater with the rest of the audience. It was so pleasurable to laugh with everybody else. I'm so glad I saw it in the theater. And it was just, I also thought it was a very smart film. I thought it was very well done. The musical sequences were great. Obviously, Rob's not as involved with the music itself. Those guys are great musicians, but I know he had a lot of creative agency over how they put those songs together and the like. And, that's a really special thing. I mean, he is a master filmmaker, and there's no hyperbole there, which is rare. You'll call certain filmmakers a visionary or a legend or whatnot. Rob just was. He and unfortunately is in some ways one of the last of that kind of generation of filmmakers. And it's going to be hard to have him that gap. He'll never be replaced, but that gap of somebody like that making movies like that continuously, horror, romance, political, mockumentary, whatever, right out of the gate. I can't imagine that happening again anytime soon.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe.
Yeah, getting back to Princess Bride, I do recommend everyone read the book. It's an amazing book. It's told in such an unusual way, but it actually explains why the grandfather is telling the story to the grandchild, Fred Savage and Peter Falk, in that wonderful, endearing relationship that they have. It's actually presented the novel as written by somebody else named S. Morgenstern, who wrote this novel that William Goldman says, and it's all fictitious, but he says when he was growing up, his father would read this book to him when he was sick and home from school. And he later tracked down a copy of the novel and saw the book was actually much worse than his father's telling, because his father would cut out all the boring stuff. So the presentation of the novel is just the good parts, I think is what he says. And there's all these parenthetical notes in between chapters, like I'm taking out this part because it's boring. I'm taking out this part because it sort of gets carried away, talking about how people are dressed or whatever, like too much detail. But one of the funny notes in there is that the characters of Miracle Max and his wife Valerie, played by Billy Crystal and Carol Kane, are written as Jews, and were actually, again, kind of fictitiously based on the parents of S. Morgenstern, who's the Jewish novelist that William Goldman is representing in this book. I think that's just like such an amazing inside look at how I have always thought that The Princess Bride is a Jewish movie also. And one of the subtle Jewish things about that film is the character of Vizzini, played by Wallace Shawn, because Wallace Shawn is playing a Sicilian, right?
Never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line.
And we know that in the history of film, Italians play Jews and Jews play Italians. And here's like the Italian, like tough guy role played by the most nebbishy Jewish guy in the world. Like, let's make it played by a, this character played by a Jew, but let's also make it like the least likely Jew to play an Italian in the roster of Hollywood actors, which to me is like one of the greatest subtle Jewish jokes in a film.
And that too goes to great direction from Rob and great casting choices. And I mean, that's one of those films where every person playing every role, you cannot imagine anyone else playing any of those characters. I mean, they just are those characters, period. Let's face facts. I mean, most of the cast is Jewish, and like some of our greatest, Manny Katinkin, and it just like it's a pretty special film. And certainly, I mean, Billy Crystal and Carol Kane, I mean, they are the quintessential old Jewish couple to a point where it's you wouldn't refer to it as caricature or anti-Semitic, because not only is everybody pretty much there, Rob himself Jewish, but the fact that it's endearing and that it feels less like a caricature and more like those are just our grandparents. That's Bubby and Zadie. And I remember a similar kind of response. We might have even talked about this before. I don't remember. But in my Nickelodeon book, when I was talking with the creators and people who worked on Rugrats, they did get a little bit of flack with the Jewish grandparents on Rugrats. And the people on the show had to say, we're pretty much all Jewish. And like, sorry, that's how our grandparents were. They were all these like old potato people, like who looked like potatoes and talked like a certain way. And that's not us making fun of them. That's us being true to who they were. And, it's part of what's great about not only being Jewish and having the connection to our past, but to write about being Jewish and to the Jewish humor and the Jewish voice. It's not being a caricature. It's being true to who they are. And they just talk like that and act like that. And I think that I'm not going to, use the word brave, but I'm glad that Rob Reiner, and to know, I've unfortunately not yet read the book, but to know that those characters were supposed to be Jewish I love that they allowed it to be like that, and that they found two of the most, archetypal Jewish actors even to do it. I mean, you don't get much more Jewish than Carol Kane and Billy Crystal, especially back then, playing those characters. So that's great that they allowed that. It's not a caricature; it's authenticity, is what it really is.
I was just watching the Siskel and Ebert review of Princess Bride, and I think it was Siskel or Ebert, one or the other, who said that they didn't recognize under the makeup who the actor was playing Miracle Max, and they thought it was maybe Mel Brooks playing that. They had to look at the credits to see that it was Billy Crystal. They were kind of surprised because, again, it is that sort of quintessential portrayal that is unmistakably Jewish, both in the film and also, again, like the note that Goldman puts in the book is that the publisher almost got rid of that part in the book, again, all fictitious, because the characters were too Jewish.
And that goes back to, of course, the infamous, Brandon Tartikoff line about Jerry Seinfeld. It's too New York and too Jewish, despite the fact Brandon Tartikoff was a New York Jew himself. And nowadays we all say, I mean, that's what the show's, one of its many legacies is it's one of the big Jewish New York shows. So it's kind of like, you're damn right, it's too New York and too Jewish. That's what we like about it. That's what made it special. That's what makes it a time capsule. Is that it's about, a Jewish New York kind of mentality, even for some of the characters who are clearly not Jewish. And even though Judaism doesn't necessarily explicitly come up in a lot of the episodes, it's just that voice, that feeling, that comes through very much like the Miracle Max character in Princess Bride. And, that's, as we know, again, even if Rob Reiner didn't quote unquote write the script, those are obvious choices that he as a director is making. And as I'm sure a lot of people watching and or listening to this know, Rob's obviously, however you want to say it, ethnically or blood-wise or whatever, Jewish, but he was not a religious person. And in fact, admired and respected all the religions, and actually would explicitly talk about how he was very educated by the teachings of Jesus, who, he's one of ours too, Rabbi Jesus. But nevertheless, he would explore all the different religions and such. He was more or less atheist, but, that Jewish culture comes through in so many of his movies. And you see that over and over and over again, even in movies that don't deal with religion or Judaism at all, just Jewish facets and exploration and wondering what's going on, and curiosity and forgiveness. And those are the Jewish values that come through consistently in every single one of his films. And that's, it's very true.
Yeah, on that point, I think it's, partly, of course, that his father was Carl Reiner, and that Carl Reiner was great friends with Mel Brooks and Sid Caesar and Woody Allen and Neil Simon and that whole crew, right? So he grew up in this very saturated Jewish vernacular world, this Yiddishkeit world, where you didn't actually have to be Jewish to sort of prove how Jewish you were. But one of the things that Reiner, of course, learned from Norman Lear, of course, our audience knows that Reiner was meathead on All in the Family, is this idea that you can take your fame and your influence and your money and put it to good work as well. Norman Lear, of course, started the People for the American Way, and then Rob Reiner, in that legacy, and he attributed much of this to Norman Lear, he also advocated for all kinds of equality and political activism on the good side of the ledger, if we can say that. So there is that Jewish sort of tikkun olam aspect to all of this as well, as you're saying.
Or even just small things. I mean, I hate to call them small, but I mean, and I love the episode where they make fun of not only Reiner, but his advocacy of doing away with cigarette smoking on South Park. It's a funny episode. It's a good episode. And I would hope that Rob found it funny too, in its own way. But, Rob was, always very much an advocate about, trying to do what he could to stamp out smoking. And, that's something that maybe a lot of people don't know or might not remember, but it was a big enough deal where I think it was about 10 years ago, South Park literally did an entire episode about it. And I know that was something that was really important for him. And to a point, on a personal level, and I had seen in an interview with him a little while ago that, Penny Marshall, who he was with for a long time, smoked, and that was difficult for him. So when he was looking for kind of a future mate, so to speak, he really wanted to make sure that person wasn't a smoker. And in fact, there was a moment where he was almost going to maybe end up with Michelle Pfeiffer through an odd series of circumstances, but she was a smoker, so that kind of kept him away from that and other things too. And of course, he ended up with his actual wife, Michelle. But the fact that that was so important for him, and that was something that was really important for me as a younger person, because my mom smoked up until I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I actually got her to stop smoking because I just didn't like it, and a lot of it was I didn't want her to die. And even at a young age, I knew how dangerous it was. And then, so I was a lifelong advocate for for non-smoking. And so that was something that was very important for Rob.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I just saw an interview with him about When Harry Met Sally, and he was saying that he actually changed the ending of the movie. They were going to split up, Harry and Sally, but it was because he couldn't understand how they could get back together because he had been single for 10 years. And, it was like beyond his comprehension how he could end the film with them getting back together. But then he met his, future wife, Michelle, and he was able to kind of reconcile that whole film. Which is interesting. Maybe he was single for 10 years because he couldn't find anyone who didn't smoke.
Unfortunately, he might be right. He obviously too is, we got to be a little warts and all here, and I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. I'm very much like this too. I could see maybe he was a bit of a workaholic. And look, I mean, he's with Penny Marshall. She's in the industry. Michelle, in her own way, was in the industry as a photographer. Again, he was, at one point almost hooked up with Michelle Pfeiffer, an actress. I mean, this is a person who's very much in this milieu of the industry, and whether it's commercials or theater or film or radio, or other forms of writing and storytelling. And let's be honest, it's a crazy industry. It's a crazy milieu to be in. So maybe that might have had something to do with it too. And the fact that he just was such a workaholic and so dedicated to what he was doing as both not only a director, but as an actor. So I would imagine that might have had something to do with it as well. But yeah, and what it's great to know, Jonathan, because I've actually read the Nora Ephron script, which is very much like Woody Allen scripts, mostly just dialogue. I don't really think there's any action text at all, if I recall. It might have been a couple of words here or there, but it's pretty much reads like a play, because obviously the dialogue in the film is what's really the dominant force in the movie. But I can't, the fact that you were saying that, I can't imagine that movie ending where they don't get back together, because it feels so smooth and it feels so organic. And I've seen that movie, umpteenth times. I've analyzed it, I've studied it, I've probably even broken it down with note cards at one point. I've used it, kind of the math of it, if you will, the infrastructure for some of my own work, including a project that I have going in the new year itself. But I just watched it again on a plane ride home from Baltimore, coincidentally from a Jewish pop culture convention that I was brought out to as a special guest. And watching it again, I was thinking about that. I was really, because normally you see a movie like that, and you might say, I don't know if they would get back together again, or that feels a little bit, cloying or chintzy, or, I didn't feel that way. And I don't remember ever feeling that way. And to know not only that he was able to do it so effortlessly with Nora's work and with the actors and everybody else, I mean, that's one of those, again, maybe that too could be called a perfect film. But to know that originally they weren't going to get back together, and it still feels so real, so smooth. I never watched that movie and go, I don't know about that. Every time I watch it, I go, yeah, that makes sense. And the way that they did it, and the lighting and the music, and that great moment at the end where now they're the quote unquote older couple explaining how they met and talking about the coconut cake, and then it just cuts right to the credits. I mean, I can't even think about how that would work with them not getting back together. So that's pretty amazing.
My less informed opinion about When Harry Met Sally, it's my wife's favorite movie, and she made me watch it, and I'm a big fan of it now. I think maybe Rob Reiner was just like a little bit too smart, and he just thinks, everybody doesn't end up together. And then maybe he became wise, when he met his future wife on the set, and then he realized, okay, we can't get
Yeah, well,
together.
to quote Princess Bride, true love.
Yeah, right. True love. I think maybe Rob Reiner kind of had like a magic touch, because all of his movies, just sort of seem like, he just ties all of the actors, kind of work wonderfully together in all of his films.
Apparently, North isn't very good.
No, it is not. It kind of became if you want to call it this, the zenith, the paragon of bad movie making. Look, I remember seeing it as a kid and in the theater. I would say about North. I mean, it's not tearing your hair out bad. You're not. You don't wish that you had that time back. It's not a great film, and it's not Misery, and it's not Princess Bride, and it's not The American President. It's certainly not Stand By Me. One thing I would say, though, is when we were talking about how Reiner is able to inject his Jewish values without even being a religious Jew into all of his films, I would definitely say that about North. North is about seeking. North is about searching. North is about lifting yourself up by your bootstraps with no resources at all and moving forward anyway. North, in a lot of ways, is an extremely Jewish film. I mean, it's in the name. And that's Elijah Wood's character. It's moving north. It's continuing to journey despite all of the disadvantages and all of the vulnerabilities. He is literally this little kid who's on his own. He is this Oliver Twist character in this very picaresque journey, and keeps going, and meets different people and is taken advantage of and is exploited. I mean, it is a very Jewish story with a lot of Jewish values in it, including, again, forgiveness and charity. I'm sure somebody could write an essay on how it might be the most Jewish of Rob Reiner's movies. The fact that it's considered his worst and one of the worst movies of all time might even be there, that it's kind of an underdog and a bit of a outlier, and yet still it's something that we talk about and remember and has its own kind of special endurance.
Very delicate. It's a bit of a departure from the kind of thing you normally play. What do you call this?
Well, this piece is called Lick My Love Pump.
I watched the Siskel and Ebert review of Spinal Tap, and they also thought it was a very, clever, smart movie. It was also sort of meta because he was the director of it, and he also sort of played the director. I think his last name was DeBurgi, which kind of made him sound a little bit Italian in a way. And yeah, it was also sort of a meta film in a way. They said it was a mockumentary, but it also just seemed like a real rock documentary in a way. Like that's actually how heavy metal was.
Even as a kid, I remember the fact that the hat that he's wearing is obviously a nod to Spielberg, because Spielberg kind of for all those years was wearing that hat. He definitely kind of looks like a kind of Steven Spielberg type of character. And so even he himself is taking on the role of a caricature of a director. So he himself is becoming a satire character, which I think is very smart, and a lot of fun. And of course, as we know, he's done even up until the end of his life for the sequel. He's done and he did interviews as Marty. I mean, he became a real character as much as Spinal Tap was a real band. And in fact, the book that came out recently about Spinal Tap that Rob Reiner and the boys were involved in, half of it is kind of a book about Spinal Tap. And then the other half, if you turn it around, is a different book that is from the point of view of Marty interviewing the guys in the band. So that's just another testament to the endurance of the characters that Rob Reiner quite literally created. I mean, that's him improvising that character, creating that character very much on the spot, and keeping up with the guys in the band and in the film, back in 1984 and more recently. And that just shows the kind of spectacular storyteller that the man was. He wasn't just a director. He wasn't just a filmmaker. He could act. He could do improv comedy. He came from the world of improv comedy. And I'll just say it. I mean, elephant in the room, call him a Nepo baby if you want, but, unfortunately, we don't have to go there. Obviously, some Nepo babies don't turn out great. He did. I'm sure that being around his father and his father's friends and everything had a big influence on him, and definitely probably gave him in a lot of ways a leg up, just even being around those people and learning from them and seeing what they were doing and that kind of thing. But he obviously had the goods, because he wouldn't have been able to keep doing that over and over and over again the way that he did. And I think that that's very important to remember. It's very likely, even if his father wasn't Carl Reiner, that Rob Reiner probably would have broken out anyway, because he obviously just as an individual had this amazing talent, and got it out there at a very young age, no less.
It is very rare for a father-son duo to be so successful, both of them, in that way. I mean, there are attempts to get the Nepo baby involved, and it doesn't always work out. But the fact that they're both distinct in terms of their body of work and their approach and their sensibilities, and both icons, I can't really think off the top of my head of another pair like that.
No, and it's important to remember that in all deference to Carl, who was incredible too, and Rob really looked up to his father. And there's an old story of at one point when he was younger, Rob told his parents he wanted to change his name, and they were like, "Oh, he wants to kind of get away from the Reiner name and everything." And he came back to them and said, "I want to change my name to Carl." I mean, that's that he really had a reverence for his father through the whole of his life. But you got to remember, Carl never made really a drama film ever. He did TV, of course, and he did his own kind of acting and radio stuff with Mel and the 2,000-Year-Old Man, and is such, Carl's definitely on the Mount Rushmore of comedians ever. But he never made a Stand By Me. He certainly never made a Misery. He never made a horror film. He certainly never made a movie like The American President. I would go so far as to say he never did anything that really approached what Rob did as a very young man, as Meathead in All in the Family.
You've been like a father to me.
Hey, you've been just like a son to me. You never did nothing I ever told you to do.
I don't really know what to say other than Rob Reiner, super iconic. We're going to miss him big time, Everybody who hasn't seen any of his films should probably go back and watch them, I would say. I still have several to watch, I'm sad to say, but I'm glad that I get to watch them and see his magic, and I'll probably rewatch the ones that I do know and love already. I mean, he will be missed, and, I think we're all better for him having been in the world.
Yeah, I usually don't get so caught up with celebrity deaths. I mean, and it's not just the nature of how it went down, but, this whole, week or so that we've been processing this, it's just put into focus how important Rob Reiner has been to me my entire life. As Matthew was saying, it's not just that we like his stuff, it's that a part of us is those films, is Rob Reiner. Like, we wouldn't be who we are without him in a way that's not typical of, celebrities that we never meet.
His work is so important for us. And I will just say that the two most important aspects of that for me as a filmmaker and as a storyteller in particular is I have shown, and I will continue to show, the sledgehammer scene in Misery. Sorry, Joey, I'm sure you're aware, as probably, in my opinion, maybe the best moment, the best sequence in cinema history, at least as far as how to learn everything: the lighting, the casting, the performance, the music, the way the music's used, the editing, the pacing, the sound design, the production design, the costuming, everything about that sequence. I have said and will continue to say that is a film school. That is 4 years and grad school of film school in that one sequence. And sure, you've got great actors, and sure, you've got a great screenwriter, and sure, you've got great source material, but that is all coming together in that scene from Rob Reiner. And I've said that before his passing, and I will continue saying that. And that to me is so much Rob. If he had never done anything else, even if the rest of Misery wasn't a good movie, I would say that one sequence is, at least for me, my favorite sequence. And not just my favorite, but I think what I would show. You want to know what filmmaking is? Watch that sequence. And Rob Reiner made it. The one other thing I will say is I'm lucky enough right now, hardworking enough, whatever you want to call it. I have a romantic dramedy that's going to be shooting in the spring that I'm very excited about. We're getting funding for it. We've got some great name talent. It's a personal story. And I've been saying all along, oh, it's an Annie Hall. It's a When Harry Met Sally. Watching When Harry Met Sally on the plane ride home from Baltimore, as I said, for the first time in a little while, even though I was very familiar with the film, I literally hit up a lot of the principals on our film and I said, I didn't realize how much what we're doing is kind of the next generation of When Harry Met Sally. And I think so much of that is just the movie was so embedded into who I am as a man, because the story that we're telling is very personal to me, who I am as a storyteller, as a filmmaker. And that, once again, is a testament to Rob. Even if he hadn't passed away and I'll watch When Harry Met Sally. That's a fun movie to watch on the plane to pass some time, to come away from that and say, I didn't realize how indelible into my storytelling process that film was. And that, once again, is a testament to Rob, and that I hope I can do his legacy justice in making a movie. And when people hopefully will say, wow, there's a lot of When Harry Met Sally in your film, Matt, I could say, you're damn right, and rightly so, and thank you, Rob, for embedding me with that kind of filmmaking. And now I can pass it along, as I did with The Misery, to this young actress girl. And I hope we can continue, and I know that we will continue passing his legacy on, because his work deserves it.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.